So those of you who've seen me speak in the past know that I like to start off with a bit of drama. So today I'm going to pretend to be Shoeless Joe Jackson for a little bit to sort of set the mood for the rest of the talk. So, what are you doing here? You don't belong here. This is heaven. This is where dreams come true. This is where I live. It's not just a field of dreams, it's a movie about a field of dreams. What could be less real than that? And you guys live in the real world. Why are you here? Oh, I know. You want your dreams to come true, just like they do in heaven. You think that if you just use your instinct and your guts and you dream and you build a product, if you build it, they will come. That's why you're here. Hey guys, I got to give you some advice. When I played baseball, it was all about guts and grit and intuition. But not too long after I moved on, baseball went through its Moneyball era, where they started to trust the numbers and the stats. Today, it's all about the stats and game theory. That's the real world now. That's where you guys live. There are folks who know how to use that to make better product decisions. Now, maybe not everybody does, so that's why this Larry guy is going to come back here in a minute, and he's going to tell you how to do it. Okay. So why should we not trust our gut? The first reason is that often some of the realities, some of the truth about the nature of things is not intuitive. It goes against our intuition. Surprising. So, would you have guessed that the Nigerian scam artists with the worst grammar had the best financial outcomes? No, you'd have thought, oh, well, if there's bad grammar, then nobody's gonna fall for it. They're gonna know it's a scam, and they're gonna not partake in it. Well, it turns out, though, that the bottleneck for the Nigerian scam artists is not the initial email. The bottleneck is the time they take getting through the first couple of contacts with folks till they believe them. And the people that are most gullible don't notice the bad grammar. So the bad grammar emails actually act as a filter that focuses their attention on people that they're much more likely to close. That's a surprising result that you wouldn't get if you just, used your intuition. You have to look at the numbers to see it. We're humans. We evolved to be the way we are through survival of the fittest. We had to react based on quick pattern matching with a very small percentage of the evidence considered. Because if we didn't, we'd be dead. So those of you that are in this room are descended from folks that are used to pattern matching decision making. And your biases are indicative of that. And we have to overcome that with data. Maybe you think you know what the right answer is. Maybe the data even says it's the right answer. But under what circumstances does that fit or not fit? And how strong is it? And when might you consider an alternative? The data helps you with this nuance and this context sensitivity that you can't get otherwise. So none of this is new. I've been talking about this stuff for a while, but other folks have been talking about it in the product world. The lean startup folks in particular have been talking about it in the product world. But their approach is decidedly qualitative. And what I'm talking about here today is decidedly quantitative. And I don't have all the answers yet. I just started on this research. But I think we've made good progress, and it looks promising to be almost as good as a way to make product decisions as it is to make process and engineering decisions now. So you met my alter ego, a little bit about my background. I went to Virginia Tech, EE, computer engineering degree. Oh, is that a UVA person there? Do we have a Hokie there? Yeah. I still have season tickets. So, are you from UVA, though? Who said boo? What? Your kids went there? Okay, you can leave. Yeah. We don't need you. Oh. So I started my first business, factory floor automation, process controls, very much a hardware-oriented business, when I was still an undergrad, actually. Grew it to 20 million a year in sales, 80 employees. And by the end of that 10-year journey, it was all about software. And so I had published some stuff and been on panels discussing how to do software in a safety-critical, high-quality way. And so Carnegie Mellon picked up on that, and that's how I ended up at Carnegie Mellon University, where the Software Engineering Institute is. Started on a PhD, working at there. And the research I was doing on my PhD was interesting, but I found that without data, I could never really be sure of it. Yeah, sure, I could do some small experiments and get my PhD, but without data, I could never really be sure of it. So I don't follow the money, I follow the data, and I followed the data to Rally Software. Rally Software is a SaaS stack. There's a lot of data that's sitting on their servers in one big database. So I thought that if I could crawl through that, I could find some interesting insights and to revolutionize the way, literally change the way software development is done with data. And I think I largely accomplished a lot of what I intended to at Rally. And the work that I'm going to talk about today builds to a large degree upon that. So I'm on my own now doing consulting for a number of folks. AgileCraft is who I've mostly been working with for the last year. But for the last few months, it's been mostly Pendo. Pendo is the source for the data set that I'm going to talk about today. I also do work for Agility Health, and if we have time, I'll go over some of that. Agility Health is a survey data set, very large survey data set that's very interesting and relevant to agile teams. And then Comcast, I do data analysis work, data science work for Comcast on cybersecurity, and that in June, July, I expect that to be my full-time work for a while. Okay, so I said I was going to build on the Software Development Performance Index. I was going to build on the work I did at Rally. That work is called the Software Development Performance Index, SDPI for short. And we use primarily these 4 metrics that you see up here. Productivity, represented by throughput. Predictability, represented by the variation in throughput. Responsiveness, time in process, cycle time, lead time, what you might be calling. And quality, defect density and defect aging were the metrics we used for that. And the reason we chose those metrics was because those were the 4 that we could extract from Rally data. And so we built the research on that, but we knew there were others we wanted to explore. And I'll come back to the list of others in a minute here. But let's poke at these for a little bit so you understand where I'm coming from. So using these 4 outcomes, we looked for signals, input metrics, that would be predictive of higher levels of those outcomes. And this is a summary of what we found over 3 years of research doing that. WIP, keeping your WIP low, was the #1 lever for improving the performance of a development team. 4 times better quality was the most surprising result. We knew it would have better responsiveness because Lil's law tells us that, right? But we didn't know that the focus on one thing or fewer things would lead to such huge improvements in quality. But just as Little Law predicts, if you take your WIP too low, you can actually move off of your peak productivity, and your throughput will actually go down with a really low WIP. So those are the findings on WIP. Stable teams. 60% better productivity, 40% better predictability. This was another big finding. This is probably the second biggest one. They're in the order of importance, I think, here. Dedicated teams, putting a person on one team, having teams that are made up of no adjunct members that also do work for other projects or other teams. That's the key to the highest productivity for teams. So that phrase stable teams is different from dedicated teams. Stable teams means that the number of people that are on your team this quarter are the same as the number of people that are on your team next quarter. If one person leaves and one person comes, and you had a 5-person team, then 2 out of 5 changed during that time, and that would be how we calculated stability. We played with a number of other stability metrics, and that's the one we settled on. It's a little more complicated than that, but there's a write-up on it if you want to know exactly how we calculated it. Team size. Smaller teams, smaller than the Agile recommendation of 5 to 9 even, have better productivity than those that are in the 5 to 9 range. Larger teams, even teams larger than 9, have better quality. So if you're building medical devices, then you might want to prefer larger teams because you need quality to be really high, otherwise people will die if you have defects in your product. But if you're building games, you might want to favor smaller teams because you need to move fast and you need high productivity. Similarly, we found that iteration length resulted in better quality if the iterations were longer. So with more people dedicated to quality and more time to do quality activities, you ended up with better quality. But shorter iteration length had better throughput and better responsiveness metrics. So also, we looked at the ratio of testers to developers. And what we found matches what we would expect, right? Having more testers on your team leads to better quality, but worse productivity. But we had one surprising finding there. Teams that said they had no testers, the upper quartile best performing of these teams actually had better quality than folks with a 1-to-1 ratio of testers to developers. But the lower quartile had worse than the worst case scenario of the other groups. So on average, it was about the same as the best quality, but the range of variability was great. So if you want to guarantee to have high quality, then you need more testers. But if you can trust that you have an agile team that's really going to own quality, then you can get away with having no dedicated testers. We looked at a lot of other things too. I actually looked at Kanban versus Scrum and interesting findings there. Co-location, big bang agile approaches, are they as effective as more ones that grow from the environment, grassroots kind of approaches? And then gender diversity was probably the most controversial thing we looked at. We were never allowed to publish our gender diversity findings because the Twitter storm, the executives at Rally were afraid of the Twitter storm that might come from that. All right, so I said we had these 4 things that we looked at Rally with the SDPI, and those were the interesting findings we had from that. These were the 4 other things that we identified right back then at the beginning of this research 5 years ago that we also wanted to get to eventually. So customer stakeholder satisfaction, employee happiness or engagement, build the right thing metric is what I called it for lack of a better term. Maybe fitness for purpose would be a more technically correct one, but this is what I called it originally, so I'm sticking with that for now. And then code quality, which is different than defects. It's really static analysis was our idea there. So what I'm talking about mostly today is this build the right thing metric. I do have the opportunity at Kendo to also look at Net Promoter Score data, which I think we'll get at customer stakeholder satisfaction. And I also have in the deck today, if we have time, some of the results, the preliminary results from the Agility Health, including team happiness is one of those factors that's considered there. And I'm actually, the work I'm doing at Comcast is on static analysis tools, mostly for security than for quality, but that's the work I'm doing at Comcast. So I can cover all 4 of these hopefully in the next couple years. So a little bit more background on the approach to doing research using the SDPI, because I'm going to use that and build upon that for this build the right thing metric work. So we had 2 kinds of signals that we looked at. And in the SDPI research, the signals were basically an index merging those 4 metrics that I talked about: productivity, predictability, responsiveness, and quality. Those were the outcome signals. These are the things that show up on the x-axis of any of the charts that we had in the research. These are the things that you could not directly influence. These are the things you wanted to have as the result at the end. Defect density, time in process, those are the things that we measured there. Lever signals is the second kind of signals. And I'm using the word lever here, and I want to caution it a little bit. We don't mean management as a lever to manipulate the team. We don't want that. We want the team as a lever, something they can change about their own practices that improve their performance. So very much self-reflective there. These are decisions that you can make. And actually, I'm not actually necessarily getting at the decision. Sometimes I'm getting at the evidence of the decision in the data. For instance, I looked at iteration length that was in the data, but they didn't tell me they decided on that, but I could see how long their iterations were in the data. Simultaneous whip, ratio of testers to developers, those are two examples we've already talked about here that are lever signals. And these things are plotted on the x-axis. Let me correct what I said earlier. The outcomes are plotted on the y-axis, and the inputs, the levers, are plotted on the x-axis. So here's an example of that. We have, on the x-axis here, we have 1 week, 2 week, 3 week, 4 week, 5 week iterations. And then on the y-axis, we have the sum of the 4 dimensions of performance that we looked at for this study. And the highest bar is the best performing one out of this group, and it was at 2 weeks. So that was our finding. We didn't just print out the chart. We used ANOVA analysis. We used principal component analysis. We did robust data science research on this to be founded. Now, I was at Carnegie Mellon and working with the SEI at the time, so I had the rigor of an academic sort of background to help me with that. One of the things that we found that was the absolute most effective technique for making sure that the thing on the x-axis, well, not in this case, but in the last slide, the thing on the x-axis, the length of the iterations, was actually the causal factor for the thing on the y-axis. Within subjects analysis has you look for folks that are the same team, but they change from 2 weeks to 3 week iterations, and then look for folks that change from 3 weeks to 2 weeks, and you look at the delta. And the reason this is really valuable is that it's the same team. It's the same code base. It's the same management structure. It's the same people. So the only thing that changed, maybe some other things changed too, but you can assume there's a high likelihood that the only thing that changed is that they changed the iteration length. And so the delta before and after the change should be indicative of the performance gain. So we also needed to look not just at the average or the median value on the y-axis. We had to look at the spread of the data on the y-axis for nuance. So this is the ratio of testers to developers one. And you can see that after you have at least one tester, it goes up as you get more testers. The ratio goes up. As the ratio of tester to developers goes up, so does the quality go up. But here's the data on the teams that said they had no. And the upper quartile here is better than any of the others across there. But the lower quartile here is worse slightly than any of the others down there. So the spread is actually pretty important and a nuance that we tried to take into account. Okay, so that sets you up from what we did. Now we're going to use some of these same concepts to do the build the right thing research here. So I'm talking about data I have access to via this company named Kendo. So a little bit of background on the Kendo product. The Kendo product has 3 main capabilities. The first is analytics. You install an agent in the header of your HTML page, and the agent is then installed for, you don't have to manually code, I want to sense this one thing, so I'm going to send a signal to the server. No, as soon as you install the agent, it starts gathering all of the events associated with that browser's usage. So we can get very deep, nuanced look at what the users are doing with your product. And then we have visualizations that aggregate that and help you to make better decisions with it. We also have guides. So the same agent that's installed, you can program it so that under certain conditions will up-pop something that will guide someone through the use of your product. And Kendo also has polls as well. Net Promoter Score is sort of a canned poll in there, but you can ask questions, any question you want of the users. So a little more context about the approach that Kendo takes, because some of you might be familiar with Mixpanel or Intercom or some of the other tools that do some of the pieces of this. So I want to differentiate this data set from those data sets. Well, the biggest differentiation is that I have access to this one and I don't. But so I would take theirs as well. But just so you understand what the data set is made up of, I want to explain these things. As I said, it captures all of the browser events with no explicit coding. The beauty of this, the value of this, is that if you have a question that you want to ask of the data, you can just go in and tag and ask that question, And all the data to do the analysis goes back in time to the day you installed the agent. Rather than say, I have a question I want to ask, let's devise an experiment, let's have someone code the experiment into the product, then let's wait for the results of the experiment, then let's analyze it. No, this is a much more rapid way of getting feedback and doing analysis. Has powerful segmentation capabilities. You can segment on visitors, you can segment on accounts, and I use that to do cohort analysis in this work. All three of these critical product management capabilities, polls, guides, and analytics, are baked into one engine. So the beauty of this is that I can use the combination of poll data and analytics data to get more nuanced answers than I would otherwise. For instance, I can ask what role you are, what's your persona in your organization. And then it combines the use of analytics not just with polls, but also with guides. So I can sense whether this feature is really powerful and anyone who uses it is much more likely to renew or to win the sale, but it's really hard for people to use. And if we add a guide like this, it's very effective at making more people use it. But maybe if we add a guide like this other way, it's less effective. So this is a very interesting analysis that we can do. A little bit about the data model. I've already mentioned a lot of these things. So an account is a customer of Pendo's that has a SaaS product, a software product that they sell as a service. A visitor is someone who comes to use that person's product. Not use our product, unless we're using Pendo on Pendo, which gets pretty confusing. But it's really Pendo's customers' customers is what visitors are. A page is what you think it is. It's a page on the web page or a page in your app. And then a feature is something less than a page, something on a page that you want to see whether people use it or not use it, and to what degree and under what conditions. As I said, it gets a little bit confusing because we use Pendo to measure Pendo. So I'm going to try to keep those straight here, but most of the examples actually come from the Pendo data set. So I have to explain this a little bit here. That said, the primary goal is not to find out what makes Pendo accounts close and sell and use the product and love the product better. The primary goal is to provide this as capability for any SaaS product to be able to figure out what is the maximum delivered value. What is the build the right thing metric? That's the goal, is to give this to every SaaS product. Terabytes of data. Data gets tagged after the fact. It's gathered, all the data is gathered during the initial event. I have not yet considered, but have potential access to the personas of the visitor or account. And I also have access to, but have not yet incorporated that work into this slide deck here. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to finish it. Net Promoter Score information. But those are coming. Those are future things. Okay, so I talked about signals, outcome signals, input signals, and let's talk about the signals for the build the right thing metric. So the primary outcome signals that we settled on were whether or not the customer renewed or churned. Now, since the first case that I looked at was Pendo's own data, and they have a 1-year contract with a few exceptions, I had to have 13, 15 months worth of data at least in order to do this analysis. So Pendo's a new startup company. There weren't a lot of examples of that. We only had about 30 or 40 examples of people that had either renewed or churned, and only 3 of those had churned. So statistical significance of that data and the ability to ramp up that quickly was not as good. So we looked for something else. And win versus loss turned out to be very, very useful. And that's what we ended up doing most of the analysis on. You can gather it much more rapidly. There's about 400 customers instead of 30 or 40 that fall into that bucket. And they have about a 50-50 close ratio, so it's nicely balanced, and you have good statistical significances on both sides of that fence. Eventually, another outcome signal will be Net Promoter Score. So this is the visualization, after several iterations, this is the visualization that we came up with to do the initial churn and win-loss analysis. And what this is here is it says -1. That means that it's 1 month back from today. It's the data from today back 1 month. And the definition of a month in this case is actually 30 days. It's not a true month. Yes?
What do you mean by win-loss?
So Kendo has a trial period, and some of those people sign up and pay. Those are wins. Some of those people don't sign up, and they go look for another tool, or they have no tool. Those are considered losses. Thank you for that question. Very good question. So we looked back four months in this case of usage, and we said that if the trial period is 1 month to 3 months, so if somebody's used the product for 4 months, that they probably are a win for Kendo. So we automatically tag that as a win. Now, there's a drop down here, so you can override that if that turns out to not be true. Maybe the deal hasn't closed yet. They're going to have a longer sales cycle than most, and you can change that to unknown then in that case. This one had 9 months of successful usage, and it stopped. So we tagged that one as 1, but churned eventually. And those turned out to all be correct in the reality of the analysis. This one we lost after 2 months of using the product. They never used it again, et cetera, and so forth. Now, this one is interesting because it's one where the heuristic said that we would, it's unknown, but it turns out we really lost the contract. So it's a little anomalous why there's somebody who, there was a 4-month gap of usage, and so we don't quite know the explanation for that. But the reality of the situation is that we lost that deal. We didn't. It's still not out there as a possibility. So I already went over most of these, but they're here for documentation purposes for the slide deck when you go. So this is the simple heuristic for renewed versus churned. And the beauty of this is that it's a simple heuristic. All I had to look at was there any visitor from that account in that month. And I could, using this series of those, I could make a guess. This is the one for win-loss. We already went over these, so I'm not going to talk about them. The other good criteria for an outcome signal, first one is that you can get it from simple heuristics. The second one is that you can improve it with human input. And so in this case, we allowed you to override it, and we improve it with human input. The lever signals that we looked at, there were lots and lots of alternatives in the data set. And Kendo didn't know which of these to give to customers because they didn't know which ones were the most predictive. So this analysis have immediate results for Kendo's own product in that we now know which types of signals are much more predictive and much more useful than others. And this is a summary of the top predictive signals. And I'll explain in detail on the next slide what these visualizations mean. But days active in the product was an example metric. Time on site, visitor churn or visitor change. So of all the users that visited this month, how many of them come back next month? Event rate, which is a measure of how big their customer base is. Weekly new visitors, guide count. This is different than this, visitor change, in that this just looks at the trend. So you might have a high churn. You might have 50 visitors visit you 1 month, and then 25 of those folks come back the next month. But next month, you also have 60 new visitors, 60 total visitors visit you, and 70 and 80. So that's the second metric, is the weekly new visitors. But the churn is the percentage of the ones that don't come back after visiting the product. Guide count. So this is a feature in the Kendo product, measuring guides, using guides. And so how often they use that feature was a metric we looked at. How often they use the page feature in the product, and how often they use the feature in the product. This is where it gets really confusing, meta, but that's what we looked at here. So how do you read these things? So the summary here at the top is what you see on here. You just see the summary, but if you click on any one of these, it will expand into a nice histogram for you. And we played with a lot of different visualizations, and we found this to be very powerful, and people really get it and get it solid with these high-level and drill-down visualization. This is what people call a box plot. This is the max value for the people that churned. This is the max value right here for the people that renewed. The min value for the people that renewed, min. And this is the lower quartile, upper quartile, and this is the median. So box plot is what we're looking at there. And what we're looking at is the overlap between these two. So if the upper quartile of this overlaps a lot with the lower quartile of this, then it's going to be hard to distinguish whether people are renewed or churned based on just this one signal. And then you can drill down into it and see it. So you have a 90% chance of guessing right when this particular metric is in the upper quartile, but you only have a little bit better than 50-50 chance of guessing right when it's in the lower quartile. So it's not a very strong signal. Here's an example of a much stronger signal. The upper and lower quartiles don't overlap at all between the two different cases. This is a win versus loss analysis. Also, there's much better than a 10 to 1 here. This is probably a 30 to 40 to 1. And that holds true for all the top groups. And this group over here is probably more like a 15 to 1 than a 10 to 1. And so even predicting loss is actually much higher percentage chance of doing that. And there are more people over here and over here than in the middle where it's a little confusing. So this signal is a 77% signal. So what that number, that summary number is, and this is the number we key off of for doing the rest of the analysis, what that 77 number is that if you just had this one lever signal, what percentage of the time would you classify the outcome correctly? And in this case, 77% of the time is one of the best ones that we saw. And 65% was pretty mediocre. Now, if you just roll the dice, you have a 50-50 chance of getting it right. So anything close to 50, anything below 60 is almost a useless signal in this analysis. So here's what we found. These are the results of the Kendo analysis. For predicting win versus loss, weekly new visitors. The trend in unique visitors was the best predictor of the outcomes. You want more and more unique visitors every month to use your product if you want the product to be successful. In our case, the feature was the second most predictive for whether we're going to win the sale or lose the sale. And the page feature was the people who use the page feature was the third most predictive. And then the number of days that people were active in the product was the fourth most predictive. Things that were not predictive, weak signals, were all the other features besides the page feature and the feature. And we were disappointed in this outcome because we thought in our instincts were that there was a few key features in the product that if we could just identify those, we know what to encourage people to use and we would win more sales and we would have more people renew. But we didn't find any of those. And I think the reason for that is that there's features in the product that are only used by one persona, let's say. And there are features in the product that are only used once a month, let's say. And those are critical and powerful features, but we didn't have that nuance or that in the data set to distinguish that. And so we couldn't control for that in the analysis. Now we have the ability to potentially go back and do that. So I expect this to change over time. The use of the guide feature was very weak as well. And this matches what the salespeople were saying, is that people come to Kendo for their analytics. They don't come to it for guides. But it's interesting, guides becomes much more critical for renewal, as you'll see on the next slide here. And then the churn in the number of visitors was also a weak signal. And this surprised us a little bit. We thought visitor churn was bad. We knew it was really bad at Kendo. It's about 50%. 50% of the people that come 1 month don't come the next month. And by the third month, it's down to like 20%. So we were really disappointed in this number, and we were worried about it. It turns out it's not very predictive of either win-loss or renew churn. And the theory is that this is the nature of the way Kendo is licensed. So you heard the afternoon keynote yesterday, talk about the signals you send to the industry. Well, the signal that our pricing structure sends to the industry is that we pay by the account. We don't pay by the number of users in the product. So sure, open it up and get every user in your organization to use it. Some of them might get value out of it, some of them won't. So what really mattered is the number of people that tried it every month, not the number of people that came back, which was a surprising result. Strong levers for renew versus churn. Weekly new visitors here was also the strongest, thank you, 15 minutes, strongest predictor. So So this is nice. Weekly new visitors is what we should be shooting for. This should be the thing that we want to encourage the most of. Event rate, which is a function of how big the customer is, was indicative of renew versus churn as well. And we think this is a function is that if their business is growing, that they're likely to have more money and they're likely to continue. So a couple of the losses that we had nothing to do with their usage of the product. It had mostly to do with financial conditions of the company that was buying from us as well. And then time that people spent in the product, not just how often they came back, was very important for renew versus churn. So people that were heavy users of the product, even if there was only one of them in the organization, still renewed the contract. Weak leavers, the page feature and the feature are now on the weak side here. So they're strong for win versus loss. So the salespeople need to focus on those features, get the trials to use those features. But they're weak for renewal versus churn. So the customer success folks should not focus on those. On the other hand, the guide feature was actually much more indicative for renew versus churn. Visitor change was the same in both. So a weak signal in both cases, surprising result in both cases. So a single signal will predict maybe best case scenario 77% of the time. But what if we can combine multiple signals? We'll use this technique called Bayesian regression to do that. And just to explain what Bayesian classifiers or regression is, think spam filters, right? So one of the characteristics in an email might be the existence of the word penis. And then another one might be existence of the word enlargement. And then another characteristic might be if penis and enlargement occur right next to each other. So these are signals that would indicate whether or not that particular email is spam. And we can combine several of these and make a better prediction of whether the thing is spam or not. So that's the idea behind Bayesian regression. All spam filters are essentially Bayesian classifiers. The nice thing is it builds on conclusions from lots of little bits of evidence. It deals well with missing evidence. So like if the word penis didn't show up, is that evidence or not evidence? It's missing evidence. Intrinsically provides a confidence factor. So you know what percentage likelihood of your prediction being right is true. It inherently comes out of the analysis. The Bayesian formula is this simple formula. I won't explain it in great detail, but for those of you that want to know a little bit more, I can answer questions about it. The probability of A given B is equal to the probability of B given A times the probability of A, all divided by the probability of B. And basically, you can use this with lots of little factors and make the output of this calculation be the input to the next one and the input to the next one and iteratively get a much higher probability. And that's what these examples show here with some network effects also being taken into account. So with Bayesian regression, we can get from 77% was the best predictor we had up to 90% ability to predict win versus loss and 93% ability to predict renew versus churn, although the statistical significance of that is is greater than plus or minus 3, so it could actually be worse than the other, but that's the way it comes out right now. Much lower statistical significance. We have much less data for renew versus churn. It accurately targets on the bubble accounts to nudge them one way or another. This is true for both sales and it's true for customer success people. So it's a very powerful tool that they're now starting to incorporate into their processes. Takeaways for Kendo. Growing users in an account, the best predictor for both win-loss and renew churn was growing the users in the account. Visitor churn was surprisingly not a good predictor. It confirms the suspicion that guides are not useful for winning the sale, but are for renewal. There's no key low-level features found, but as we said, we think we could find those if we had some more segmentation based on personas of industry and personas of the account and personas of the visitor. And the event rate might be a proxy for account size or financial health. So this is a summary of things I've already said, but they're here in writing here for you. We're not done. There's a lot more work to do with this data set. How much of this holds true when we look at Kendo's customers' customers. Thank you. That's important because we want this product to roll out to customers. We're starting to do some experiments now with early customers using this capability. We want to incorporate the persona data. We want to add other metadata for the usage account. We want to trend things. So in the most case, we looked at the level, not the trend. There was one metric in there that was a trend metric, but we want to have more of those. We think, and that was the most predictive one. So we think more trending metrics would actually be more powerful here. We didn't try a lot of trending metrics because we originally thought those would be what would work best in the SDPI research, and it turned out trending metrics were not the most predictive in the SDPI. Level metrics were actually more useful. In this case, we might find the opposite being true. So I only have 10 minutes, so I want to leave a few minutes for questions. So I'm going to skip the next two sections here, unless you guys really want to hear about one or the other of them. The first section here is about non-parametric modeling, and we've heard people talk about the Weibull distribution being superior to other ones for modeling time and process, but the Weibull distribution is also not very good at predicting time and process. It's better than the other alternatives. So non-parametric modeling is a way to deal with that. Is there anyone who really wants to hear about how to fix that? Well, we have one person. Okay, so okay, 2 or 3. Okay. The other one I have is the agility health data. This is the survey of agile teams and which factors were more predictive of performance, better performing teams. Does anyone want to see that? Okay, so more people want to see that. So we'll do that one, and we'll skip the non-parametric modeling unless you come up and talk to me after. And I'll have to move pretty quickly through the... Okay, so Agility Health is a company, and they have a product called a radar. And it's really a team behaviors, team practices survey, 75-question survey. But seated in this list, there's also some performance survey questions, customer satisfaction, team happiness, or outcomes. So we have in this list of 75 questions, we have some outcomes and we have some lever signals as well to be extracted from those. The survey is not just given to people and they take it on their own. There's actually a paid-for session where a trained facilitator gets up in front of the group and explains what he means by each section, and then the people take the survey questions for just that section, and then they move on to the next section and such. So this is to try and mitigate survey fatigue and to make sure people are actually understanding what the questions are really asking before they answer them. So it improves the accuracy of the survey greatly. It's facilitated by these highly trained Agile experts. Its targeted purpose, though, is not research. Its targeted purpose is self-improvement. So we're using the data for something other than it was originally intended, and there's some problems with that. But we'll talk about those. So here are actually the list of some of the problems lower on this page. It is more closely related to my SDPI work than the Kendo work. It should be more interesting when we can combine the two. But there's some issues with this data set right now, and I've just really started looking at this data set. So I have to address some of these questions, these problems, these issues, these confounds. Those surveyed often give middle-of-the-road responses. I call this the Casper milk toast effect. And because Casper's white, and white is sort of what you get when you have everything, right? And it's even worse when you average the results from multiple team members. So we have to find a way to deal with that. We actually started dealing with the second part of that already. How to sense if there's survey fatigue and account for it. The Agility Health folks insist there's no survey fatigue, that everybody reads every question. But I was at dinner last night with somebody, and they said that they took a survey recently where on question 30 of the survey, the question was, we want to see if you're still actually reading the question, so we want you to answer D for this one. And so we don't have any questions like that in the Agility Health, so we can't filter for that. One thing we could do, we haven't yet, is to sense whether all the answers later in the survey are similar to each other compared to more variety earlier. But that could be a function of the nature of the questions too. So it might help, but we don't know yet. Self-assessment confounds. So this is a phenomenon that people talk about all the time, that when I'm a novice, when I'm an early novice, I say, well, I don't know much. But once I get to be an intermediate novice, a late novice, then I think I know everything, right? I don't know what I don't know. And it's not till I learn what I don't know, learn which things I don't know, that I become an intermediate person. And I might actually give myself a lower score, but actually be doing these practices to a better, more mature level. So this is a very difficult confound to deal with in the data, and I'm not really sure how we'll address that one. We might have to just live with it. It's also, because the survey is not classified as outcomes and levers, it's very hard to tease those apart sometimes, in some cases. So it turns out that the best predictor for team performance is one of the best predictors that we found in the SDPI research. It's also what Kokomo research, Barry Beam did 30 years ago, and that's the skill, talent of the people combined with the confidence, or as measured by the confidence in the skill and the talent of the people. Since it's a survey, it's a confidence sort of metric. That's the number one predictor of the performance of the team, is how talented, how mature, how skilled the members of the team are. Short-term plan, very critical. Having a great short-term plan, knowing exactly what's coming up next, having a nicely groomed list of things to pull from in your first column of your Kanban board is critical. Backlog management, how do things get into that first column will determine how good that short-term plan is. So that's also very critical for the team performance. And then clarity of roles. Social psychologists have been telling us this for years. This is another very strong predictor of team performance. Leadership. Actually, the next 5 questions, the top next 5 metrics, I should say, levers, were tied for 5th place. But 4 of them mention leadership or something related to leadership. So I summarized the 5th one as being leadership. The worst levers for team performance, this is surprising, is sustainable pace. So the theory I have here is that sustainable pace is proxy for folks that have a lot of fun time and have very short work hours. Well, maybe slightly longer work hours and slightly less fun at work actually leads to better performance. And this is evidence that that might be true. Now, I'm sure you can go too far and have complete out-of-balance work-life balance and really be breaking sustainable pace. But in this case, it's actually the worst lever to use for team performance. And it was close to being inverted. It's close to being people who said they had low work-life balance or sustainable pace actually had better performance. It wasn't quite. It was right on the bubble there for that. Physical environment or tools. So these 2 questions were asked together, so it was hard for me to tease them apart. I wish I had, because I suspect that the use of tools is not a good predictor of the performance of the team, but the environment might be a little bit of a good predictor. And the Agile coaches and the Agile community has been saying that having everyone in a single workspace is important. Although some of the work I did at Rally said that turns out to not be true. So team allocation and stability was also a weak predictor, which disagrees directly with one of the strongest predictors of performance from the SDPI research. It also disagrees with what the Agility Health folks think is true, which they believe based on their expertise. So I suspect one of the confounds is messing this one up, and it's tough to, we'll have to poke at this one more. And then long-term plan or roadmap is also a weak predictor for team performance. Now, if we were looking at portfolio performance, maybe the Kendo data, having a roadmap would actually result in better features being in the product. So that might be more predictive, but it's not predictive of team performance. And then the management role, so it's an unfortunate wording of this question in the survey. It's all about the management role and process improvement rather than process improvement itself. Because I suspect process improvement itself is really important for team performance. But the manager initiating it is not. Maybe it's the team that has to initiate the process improvement for it to be effective. So I'll end with a little bit of drama here. In the field of dreams, one character says to the other, People will come for reasons they can't even fathom. They'll arrive at your door and you'll say, of course we won't mind if you look around and it's only $20 per person. They'll pass over the money without even thinking about it, and they'll watch the game. It'll be as if they dip themselves in magic waters. There are no magic waters. Your dreams won't come true. If you build it, they might not come. You have to make smart management decisions, and you have to use the data to improve those. Thank you.